This session begins now. Discover how changing your habits can change your life with #1 New York Times bestselling author James Clear. Here again is Jeannie Price.
Hello again, Usana. I am beyond delighted to introduce our next guest, as I think his content is an all too perfect segue from our All About Business segment we just completed. With good reason. We talked about the importance of creating new habits to create greater success in your Usana business. And this is your time to learn how to turn that into action. James Clear is one of the world's most well-respected thought leaders on habits, decision-making, and continuous improvement. His book, Atomic Habits, is a #1 New York Times bestseller. Over 5 million copies have been sold worldwide, and it's been translated into more than 50 languages. He speaks regularly to Fortune 500 companies all over the globe. And his popular 321 newsletter at jamesclear.com has over 1 million subscribers, in addition to the hundreds of thousands of followers on social media. I've heard James say, the worst distractions are the ones we love. But in our case, this is a wonderful distraction I think we're all going to love as well. Let's welcome James Clear.
Hello, thank you so much for the warm welcome. Pleasure to be talking to you.
So earlier, our CEO, Kevin Guest, talked about why vision is so meaningful to Usana. And I mentioned this, James, because it reminded me of something from your book. Many people think they lack motivation when what they really lack is clarity. And I found that this idea really simple, but it's very significant. You know, you emphasize simple and easy in your book, which is something all of us at Usana can totally get on board with. In fact, you know, we say it all the time. And on that note, the time is yours.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to be speaking with you all today. I'll be talking about some of the core concepts and key ideas from my best-selling book, Atomic Habits. We'll be sharing some strategies for building good habits and breaking bad ones. And my hope is that over the next, 30 minutes or so, you'll be able to understand and unpack habits at a greater degree and in greater detail than before, and be able to apply them to the work that you do and to your personal lives. So let me go ahead and jump in. I like to talk about these topics through the lens of different stories. And the first story that I like to share is the story of the British cycling team. For many years, British cycling was very mediocre. They had very modest performance on the world stage. And the premier race in cycling is the Tour de France. And the race had been around for a little over 100 years. This is around 2003, 2004. And the British team had never won. The other major events in cycling are the road and track cycling events at the Olympic Games. And again, over about a 100-year span from 2003 from the early 1900s until about 2003, the British team had won a single gold medal at the Olympic Games. And, after this very modest performance for nearly a century, they wanted to change this. They wanted to perform at a higher level. They wanted to fulfill their potential. They wanted to achieve more. And so around that time, they hired a new coach by the name of Dave Brailsford. And Brailsford had one concept, one idea that made him a little bit different than the coaches that had come before. And he referred to that concept as the aggregation of marginal gains. The aggregation of marginal gains. And the way that he described it was the 1% improvement in nearly everything that we do related to cycling. So they started with a bunch of things that you would expect a cycling team to focus on, like they put slightly lighter tires on the bike, or they designed a more ergonomic seat. They asked each rider to wear a little chip, a little like feedback sensor, to see how each individual would respond to practice and training sessions. And they used that feedback, that data, to adjust the workout programs for each person. But cycling is a competitive sport, and there are many teams that are doing things like that. And so then they started to look for changes, for little 1% improvements, for small advantages in areas that nobody else was really thinking about. Like they hired a surgeon to come in and teach the riders how to wash their hands to reduce the risk of catching a cold or getting the flu. They tested different types of massage gels, see which one led to the best muscle recovery. They have two different types of suits. They've got indoor racing suits and outdoor racing suits. And they took those two different types of fabric and they tested them in a wind tunnel. And they found out that the indoor fabric was lighter and more aerodynamic. And so they asked all of their riders to wear that fabric when they raced. They have a large truck, like a big semi-trailer that carries a lot of the bikes in it to major events. And they painted the inside of that trailer white so that they could better spot little bits of dirt and dust that might get in the gears and degrade the performance of the bikes. They even asked each rider to test, a dozen different types of pillows to see which one would lead to the best night's sleep for each person. And then once they figured that out, they brought that pillow on the road with them for races and, big events like the Tour de France and so on. So Brailsford said, if we can actually do this, right, if we can actually make all these little 1% improvements related to cycling, then I think we can win a Tour de France within 5 years. Now, he ended up being wrong. They won the Tour de France in 3 years, and they repeated again in the fourth year with a different rider. And then after a 1 year break, they won the next three in a row. So after having never won for 110 plus years, suddenly they win 5 out of the next 6. But it was really at the Olympics in London in 2012 when the strategy sort of fully blossomed, because the Tour de France, there is a team element to it, but ultimately one person wins the race. But at the Olympic Games, you've got men's team, women's team, dozens of riders, dozens of events, and the British cycling team won 70% of the gold medals available in London. 4 years later in Rio 2016, same story. 60% of the gold medals go to the British team. And so this idea that 1% improvements are not just like nice to have, they're not just a bonus or a little bit extra on top of your performance, but actually can be the pathway to unlocking elite levels of success, exceptional levels of performance. I think it's a little counterintuitive, a little underappreciated, certainly something that we don't talk about enough. And so what we're really saying here is that excellence is often not about radical change. It's actually about accruing small improvements over time. And this idea that, small improvements can make a difference over time, that continuous improvement is powerful, it's a fairly straightforward idea. It's a fairly, simple concept, but most people don't take it seriously. And if you do take it seriously, if you do wake up each day and look for a small margin of improvement to be gained, look for some small advantage to carve out in the work that you do or the things that are important to you, boy, you'd be surprised what that can turn into in the long run. I like to visualize this concept in a couple different ways. So this graph is one way to visualize it. So what this graph is showing is if you get 1% better each day for a year, so 1.01 to the 365th power, you get 37 times better by the end of the year. And if you get 1% worse, 0.99 to the 365th power, you drive yourself almost all the way down to zero. Now, real life is not exactly like compound interest, right? Real life is not exactly like a mathematical formula, which is basically what we're showing here. But man, I feel like graphs like this do a good job of encapsulating what the process of behavior change feels like. Imagine you're at day one on this curve. Okay, you're at the very beginning. What is the choice, or what is the difference between a choice that's 1% better or 1% worse? On any given day, like not a whole lot, like what is the difference between somebody who eats a burger and fries for lunch or someone who eats a salad? On any given day, not very much. Your body looks the same in the mirror at the end of the night. Scale hasn't really changed. It's only 2 or 5 or 10 years later that you turn around and you're like, oh, those daily choices really do add up. I like to joke that we kind of, we like just follow our daily routine and like do our normal thing. And then all of a sudden, like 3 years from now, knock, knock, who's there? Oh, the consequences of my past decisions. It's like, turns out that stuff creeps up on you. And I think we all know this, like we all have felt this just from going through life, from building habits, which is that your habits are a double-edged sword. They can either build you up or they can cut you down. And I think that's a good reason, a strong argument for why you want to understand what a habit is and how it works so that you can be the architect of your habits and not the victim of them. So for all of those reasons, I like to refer to habits as the compound interest of self-improvement. The same way that money multiplies through compound interest, the effects of your habits multiply as you repeat them across time. And what we're really saying here is that time will magnify whatever you feed it. Like if you have good habits, time becomes your ally. And all you need is patience. And if you have bad habits, then time becomes your enemy. Every day that clicks by, you dig the hole a little bit deeper. So this is sort of the first big idea that I'm trying to get across today, which is an encouragement to focus on trajectory rather than position. There's a lot of discussion about position in life. What is the number on the scale? How much money is in the bank account? What is the current stock price? What are the quarterly earnings? All these measurements, all these metrics for where we're at right now. And measurement can be useful, but what I'm saying is just for a second, let's set the numbers to the side and instead focus on our trajectory. Are we getting 1% better or 1% worse? Is the arrow pointed up and to the right or have we flatlined? Because if you're on a good trajectory, all you need is time. But if you're on a bad trajectory, even if you're in like a pretty good position right now, it's not going to end well. So this is kind of the core idea of getting 1% better. It's focus on this mindset, this approach of emphasizing trajectory over position. Now, if you buy into that, then, you could say, all right, fine. 1% changes, I can see how they can add up. I understand how continuous improvement can be meaningful over time. But if they matter so much, if these like small improvements can be so powerful, how come more people don't make them? Why is behavior change hard? We have all these like common narratives about how difficult it is to change our habits and shift your performance. And one of the common answers is something like, well, maybe if you really wanted it, then you would do it, right? Maybe if you had more discipline or grit or willpower or persistence. And I don't want to totally dismiss that because certainly discipline and grit and willpower are very important qualities in life. But I don't know that that answer is quite right. I think many people, certainly most people watching this presentation right now, genuinely do want to perform at a high level, genuinely do want to fulfill their potential, genuinely do want to achieve more. So what I would say is, look, if you're struggling to improve, the problem isn't you. The problem is your system. We don't change, not because we don't want to change, but because we have the wrong system for change. And I think we could even go a step further and say, listen, you don't rise to the level of your goals, you fall to the level of your systems. So often in life, we're told you need to 10x your vision, you need to want it more, you need to be more ambitious, you need to, think bigger. But, the truth is setting the goal is kind of the easy part. I'm an author, right? So I could set a goal to sell 10 million books. It took me like 3 seconds. The goal is not the hard part. The hard part is executing on a system of behaviors, a collection of habits that carries you toward that goal. And there's sort of this like funny little thing, strange little dynamic in life, which is that usually in most domains, the winners and the losers have the same goals. The people who are succeeding and the people who are struggling, they want the same things. So like take the British cycling team, for example. Presumably, every athlete that competes at the Olympic Games has the goal of winning the gold medal. Right? The goal is not the thing that separates the difference in their performance. Or say you have a job opening and 100 people apply for the job. Presumably, every candidate has the goal of getting the job. Right? The goal is not the thing that determines the outcome. So to put a little finer point on the language here, like what do I mean by goal and system? Your goal is your desired outcome, the target, the thing you're shooting for. What is your system? It's the collection of daily habits that you follow. And if there is ever a gap between your goal and your system, if there's ever a gap between your desired outcome and your daily habits will always win, right? Almost by definition, your current habits are perfectly designed to deliver your current results. So whatever system you've been running for the last 6 months or year or 2 years, whatever it is, it's carried you almost inevitably to the results that you have right now. And this is, one of those ironic things about life. We also badly want better outcomes, right? We also badly want to make more money or to reduce stress or to be more productive, but the outcomes are not actually the thing that needs to change. It's like fix the inputs and the outputs will fix themselves. Fix the habits that lead to the outcome and the results will change naturally. Now, I'm setting this up kind of like a dichotomy, right? But of course, what we actually want is an alignment between your desired outcome and your daily habits, to have an alignment between your goal and your system. Now, I can't tell you what your goals should be, and you wouldn't want me to anyway. Like, that's for you to decide. What are you optimizing for in your life? What's important to you? What do you want to prioritize? But I think metaphorically speaking, it's best to set the goal on the shelf once you've decided on it and spend the vast majority of your time focused on building a better system. And I can help with that, right? How do we design a better system? How do we adjust the gears of the underlying machine, build better habits, and put those together to create a more productive, more effective, more efficient routine? So let's talk about that now. How do we change a habit? I like to break a habit into 4 different stages. And I think if you understand these 4 stages, you not only understand what a habit is and how it works, but you also have like 4 different levers that you can pull for intervening. So real quick, just from a high level, those 4 stages are cue, craving, response, and reward. Cue, craving, response, and reward. Now, the cue is a trigger that tells your brain to initiate the habit. Okay, so it's something that gets you prompted, gets you going. So maybe your phone buzzes in your pocket. That's a physical cue that starts the habit of checking your phone. Or you look across the kitchen and you see a plate of cookies on the counter. That's a visual cue that starts the habit of eating a cookie. Okay. Now, the next thing that happens is your brain makes a prediction about what that cue means. So maybe you see the plate of cookies, visual cue, and then you get this natural craving or this prediction, oh, those will be sweet, sugary, tasty, enjoyable. And so it's actually that favorable meaning that you assign to the sweet, that you assign to the dessert, that motivates you to take the third step, which is you walk over, you pick it up, you take a bite. So that's the actual habit that you perform. And then finally, there's the reward. Oh, it is in fact sweet, sugary, tasty, enjoyable. And so the reward not only satisfies the craving that motivated you to act, it also closes the feedback loop. So in a sense, you can think about these 4 stages as like a cycle. And as you go around, cue, craving, response, reward, cue, craving, response, reward, the more a behavior is preceded by a reliable cue, and the more that it's followed by an enjoyable reward or a satisfying experience or something that's beneficial, the more reason you have to repeat it again in the future. And it's like the tighter the behavior becomes and the more automatic and mindless it becomes. Now, just a quick note on this final stage, not every behavior in life is rewarding, right? Sometimes things have a cost or a consequence. Sometimes they're just kind of neutral and don't really mean a whole lot. But if a behavior is not rewarding, it's unlikely to become a habit. Your brain needs some positive emotional experience, some reason to mark that action and say, hey, this was worth it. You should repeat it again next time. So cue, craving, response, reward. Those are sort of the 4 stages, the scientific overview of what a habit is, how it works. And most behaviors in life can be, pretty efficiently mapped onto these 4 steps. Now, what I like to do is operationalize this. How do we turn this into something useful? How do I make this something practical that I can apply in daily life and work? So what I've come up with is what I call the 4 laws of behavior change. And there's one for each step. So the first law is to make it obvious. You want the cues of your good habits to be obvious, available, visible, easy to see. Easier it is to see or get your attention, to notice it, the more likely you are to act upon it. The second law is to make it attractive. The more attractive or appealing a habit is, the more motivating or enticing it is, the more exciting it feels, the more likely you are to feel motivated to do it. The third law is to make it easy. The easier, more convenient, frictionless, simple a habit is, the more likely it is to be performed. And then the fourth and final law is to make it satisfying. The more satisfying or enjoyable a habit is, the more rewarding it is or pleasurable it is, the more likely you are to return to it in the future. So if you have a habit that you're trying to build, whether it's something in your personal life or something in your business, and you're just sitting there being like, I just can't quite do this consistently enough, or I'm having trouble getting started. What should I do? You can just go through these 4 laws. How can I make the behavior more obvious? How can I make it more attractive? How can I make it easier? How can I make it more satisfying? And the answers to those questions will help reveal different actions you can take, different improvements you can make to make it more likely that you'll build a good habit and less likely that you'll slide into a bad one. Now, I do want to mention that these 4 laws, or the overview I just gave, that's like the high level overview for how you build a good habit. If you want to break a bad habit, then you just invert those 4. So rather than making it obvious, make it invisible. Unsubscribe from emails. Don't keep junk food in the house. If you're trying to follow a diet, don't follow food bloggers on Instagram, right? Like, just reduce exposure. Rather than making it attractive, make it unattractive. Rather than making it easy, make it difficult. Increase friction, add steps between you and the behavior. And rather than making it satisfying, make it unsatisfying. Layer on some kind of cost or consequence to the action. So that's the high level overview for breaking a bad habit. Now, what I want to do is give you a couple examples here, just for the sake of time. Unfortunately, I won't have time to go through all this in detail. Of course, Atomic Habits, the book, covers all this in much greater detail, but I do want to give you just a few examples of what this might look like in practice so that you can see how would you apply this for building good habits. So let's talk about the first law, making it obvious. Massachusetts General Hospital is a large teaching hospital in Boston. And there's a researcher there named Anne Thorndike, and she had an interesting question, which is, can we change people's behavior without motivating them, without increasing their willpower? In fact, we're not going to talk to them at all. So what she and her team did, they went into the hospital cafeteria. So here's a picture. Here's a picture drawn to scale. So this picture here, the gold shaded boxes are different refrigerators that have Coke, soda, juice, different drink options in them. And then the 2 dark boxes on the sides of the room, those are smaller refrigerators that have water. And then all the other shapes are different food stations, food buffet lines, and so on. Now, what the researchers did was they went into the hospital cafeteria and they added water. So they added water to the main refrigerator. So there's still Coke and soda and juice and so on. And then they also added a couple of these little rolling carts around the different food stations, and those had water in them as well. So essentially, they just increased the prevalence of water in the environment. All right, what happens 6 months later? 25% more water is sold, 11% less soda. And, whenever I come across a story like this or a research study like this, I refer to them as like environment design studies because they're reshaping the way the room is laid out. And I always find it interesting, like, say you went up to somebody in that room and you're like, hey, why are you drinking water? You'd be like, what are you talking about? This is what I wanted to have. Like, why'd you drink a Coke? This is what I felt like buying. But the truth is, some percentage of them chose that option just because of how it was presented to them. And this is one of the most overlooked drivers of your habits and behavior, which is the shape of your physical environment. The items on your desk at work, the things on your kitchen counter at home, the way your living room is laid out, like all of these spaces where we live and work, they exert an influence on our behavior. And if you want to change your behavior, it is often best to start by changing your environment, by priming the rooms and the spaces where you work in. One thing you can do is just think about one habit that you're trying to build, and then walk into the rooms and look around, the ones where you spend the most space, where you spend the most time throughout the day. And then ask yourself, what behaviors are easy in this room? What behaviors are obvious in this room? What does this space encourage? What is the path of least resistance? And, you'll often notice a few different things that you can do to make it easier to follow through on the behaviors you want to build and to avoid some of the behaviors that maybe you're sliding into that you'd prefer not to do. When you've got plenty of energy, when you have a lot of capacity, when you're well rested, when you have free time, sure, maybe you can make whatever choice, even if depending on whatever environment you're in. But when you're busy, when you're tired, when you're stressed, when you haven't slept that much, or when you have a lot on your plate, what do we often choose? We choose the path of least resistance. So stack the deck in your favor and redesign the environment so that the good action is the obvious one. If you want an example of this, a lot of people feel like they watch too much television, but walk into any living room. Where do all the couches and chairs face? It's like, what is this room designed to get you to do? Now, I'm not saying you need to rearrange your entire house, but you get the idea, right? There's like a spectrum of choice here. You could take the TV and put it inside a cabinet so you're less likely to see it, or turn the chair away from the TV, have it face an end table with a book on it. And no individual choice like that is going to radically transform your behavior, but collectively, it can make a big difference. All right, so I think you get the key takeaway here, which is if you want a habit to be a big part of your life, make the cue a big part of your environment, make it obvious. Okay, so that's the first law, making it obvious. Second law is making it attractive. Unfortunately, we don't have time to go into that one in detail, but I do just want to mention one thing about making your habits attractive, which is it can depend heavily on the social environment, on the people you're hanging around with. And I think one of the punchlines, maybe something you can take away with you, is you want to join groups where your desired behavior is the normal behavior. Because if it's normal in that group, then it's going to be very attractive, very motivating for you to stick to it. All right, so the third law, making it easy, I do want to offer another little example here. So each morning, there's kind of a moment that shapes how my day is going to go. Let's say it's like 9 a.m. and I go into my office and one of two things happens. Either I open up Google Docs and start writing the next article I'm going to work on, or I go to some of my favorite websites and check the latest sports news. And, what happens in the first 45 seconds really determines what happens in the first 45 minutes. Because if I start reading about sports, that hour is pretty much shot. But if I jump into the writing, even if it's just a sentence, then it's okay, now I'm into the work and the momentum sort of carries you forward. And the hardest part is that first movement, that first action. And I want to give you a little example, tell you a little story, a strategy that you can use for overcoming that little initial bit of friction in your own life and making it easy to get started. So there's a little strategy I like to refer to as the 2-minute rule. And it's very simple. It just says, take whatever habit you're trying to build and scale it down to something that takes 2 minutes or less to do. So read 30 books a year becomes read 1 page, or do yoga 4 days a week becomes take out my yoga mat. And sometimes when I share this, people resist it a little bit. They're like, okay, buddy, I know the real goal isn't just to take my yoga mat out. I know I'm actually trying to do the workout. So this is some kind of mental trick, and I know it's a trick, then why would I fall for it, basically? And I get where people are coming from, but I have this reader. His name's Mitch. I mentioned him in Atomic Habits. And he's lost over 100 pounds. So what was that, 40, 50 kilos? Kept it off for more than a decade now. And when he first started going to the gym, he had this strange little rule for himself where he wasn't allowed to stay for longer than 5 minutes. So he'd get in the car, drive to the gym, get out, do half an exercise, get back in the car, drive home. And it sounds silly, right? It sounds like crazy. You're like, this obviously is not going to get the guy the results that he wants. But if you take a step back, what you realize is that he was mastering the art of showing up, right? He was becoming the type of person that went to the gym 4 days a week, even if it was only for 5 minutes. And this is one of the most overlooked truths about habits, something that's deeply true, but rarely appreciated, which is that a habit must be established before it can be improved. It has to become the standard in your life before you can scale it up and turn it into something more. And you need to standardize before you optimize. Like let's get established, let's get a little foothold, and then we can use that to advance to the next level. I'm reminded of that quote from Ed Lattimore where he says the heaviest weight at the gym is the front door. There are a lot of things in life that are like that. The hardest part is getting started. The heaviest step is the first one. So the 2-minute rule kind of pushes back on that perfectionist tendency and helps you master the art of showing up. All right, so the fourth and final law now, making it satisfying. I'll just give you a brief example here for the sake of time. I refer to this as a Seinfeld strategy. Jerry Seinfeld, famous comedian, he was going to different comedy clubs early in his career. And there's this story that he went backstage one night and there's this young comic named Brad Isaac who's opening for him. And supposedly he says something like, Mr. Seinfeld, I'm a big fan of your work. Wonder if you have any tips for a young comic. Seinfeld thinks for a second and says something like, well, the secret to being a better comic is to write better jokes. And the secret to writing better jokes is to write every day. So one thing you could do is like get a big wall calendar where you can see every day of the year mapped out on it. And any day that you do your task of writing jokes for 5 minutes or 10 minutes, whatever it is, you put an X on that day. And it doesn't matter how good or how bad the jokes are. It doesn't matter how you feel about the jokes. Just don't break the chain, right? It's just about building up this streak and sticking to it. And that mantra, don't break the chain, boy, that's a powerful idea. It can be applied to all sorts of habits. This is a picture of a habit tracker that's at the back of a habit journal that I helped design. And, you can build up your streak of X's, and putting down an X is a small thing, right? It seems like it wouldn't count for very much, but it helps you visualize your progress. And progress is one of the most motivating feelings to the human mind. You have every reason to continue. Now, building up a streak is motivating, but losing a streak can feel demotivating. So I like to combine this philosophy of don't break the chain with the second philosophy, which is never miss twice. Maybe you start a new diet and you stick to it for 5 or 6 or 7 days. And then on the 8th day, your friends want to go out for drinks and you binge eat and you're like, well, I wish that hadn't happened, but never miss twice. So let me make sure the next meal is a healthy one. And if you can do that, then in the long run, it's just a little blip on the radar. The mistakes don't mean very much. But that's only true if you never miss twice. All right, so let me recap here. Cue, craving, response, reward. Make it obvious, make it attractive, make it easy, make it satisfying. Now, we're going to take some questions here in just a minute. But before I do that, I want to let you in on one final idea, which I consider to be the secret of this talk. And the secret is it's not actually about little habits. It's actually about believing something new about yourself. And this is a concept that I refer to as identity-based habits. I unpack this in much greater detail in chapter 2 of the book, but the core idea is that true behavior change is really identity change. It's really believing something new about yourself when you change the story about who you are. And so that's why I say, look, the real goal is not to read a book. The goal is to become a reader. The goal is not to run a marathon. The goal is to become a runner. The goal is not to do a silent meditation retreats, to become a meditator. And in these examples, I'm using labels like reader, runner, meditator, and so on, but it's true for characteristics as well. I'm the type of person who finishes what they start, or I'm the type of person who shows up on time. I'm the type of person who's reliable. And the more that you believe those things about yourself, the more that you start to adopt that element or that aspect of your identity, the easier it becomes to follow through on behaviors like that. Someone who already views themselves as I am a runner, they don't have to convince themselves to get up and go for a run in the same way that somebody who's just getting started might. So how does this connect back to everything we've talked about today? How does this connect back to the rest of the presentation? I think the answer is it connects in a very deep and meaningful way, which is that every action you take is a vote for the type of person you wish to become. So no, doing one push-up does not transform your body, but it does cast a vote for I'm the type of person who doesn't miss workouts. And no, writing one sentence may not finish the novel, but it does cast a vote for I'm a writer. And no, making one sales call or sending one email may not make you the world's best salesperson, but it does cast a vote for I'm the type of person who's committed to growing my business. And individually, these are small things, but collectively, you start to build up this body of evidence, and the scale starts to tip in favor of that story. And I think this is the real reason, the true reason that habits matter, which is your habits reinforce your desired identity. They provide evidence of being that kind of person. And this is a little bit different than what you often hear. You often hear people say something like, fake it till you make it. And I don't necessarily have anything wrong with fake it till you make it. It's asking you to believe something positive about yourself, but it's asking you to believe something positive without having evidence for it. And we have a word for beliefs that don't have evidence. We call that delusion, right? Like your brain doesn't like this mismatch between what you say you are and what you're actually doing. And so my argument is to let the behavior lead the way, to start with 1 minute of meditation or one phone call or one push-up or whatever it is, and to let that one small action be evidence that you were that kind of person. All right, so I'm not going to bore you with the stats on the book. It's done incredibly well. I will just mention, I do genuinely think if you enjoy the presentation, you'll also enjoy the book. And it's there for you as a reference guide. It's there for you to build upon all these concepts and, fill out all of the detail that we didn't have time to discuss today. So I'm going to pass it back to Jeannie to take some questions. But as we do that, I'm just going to leave you with one parting question for you to consider and think about, which is, how can you get 1% better today? So thank you so much. And I look forward to taking your questions. Jeannie, what do we have?
Oh my goodness. Thank you, James. That was fantastic. Well, lucky for all of us, we're not quite finished yet. I've already seen a lot of great comments and questions in our live chat. We'll try to get to as many as we can. Let's begin with an amazing team from Korea. I'd like to take a moment to recognize them for their efforts in helping other distributors pursue their dreams. Because of their hard work and dedication, they have earned the distinction of being named Asia Pacific's #1 income earner. Congratulations to Shung Ya Park and Hak Bung Pyong. Such a great accomplishment. What is your question for James?
네, 수상하게 되어 너무나 기쁘고 영광으로 생각합니다. 특히 유사나에 진심으로 감사합니다. 지금까지의 성장을 위해서 저희는 끊임없이 지속적인 노력을 해왔는데요. 사실 새로운 방법과 아이디어를 기존의 틀에 도입하는 것이 쉽지만은 않았습니다. 그래서 오늘 제임스에게 우리의 삶에 새로운 방법이나 습관을 추가할 때 가장 좋은 방법이 무엇인가를 여쭤보고 싶습니다.
Oh, great question. Congratulations, first of all, on the incredible achievement. Well done. And I certainly understand that you've had to evolve over time, and I appreciate that too, because evolution is a really important part of growth and behavior change. I do have one idea for introducing new behaviors into your life, and I talk about this more in the book, but there are some strategies like habit stacking or implementation intentions that can be really useful. So implementation intentions, for example, is just when you state your intention to implement a new behavior. So it can be really simple. It can be something like take exercise, for example. I intend to exercise on Monday at 4 p.m. at this location. And so just by filling out the time, the date, and the exact place where you're going to perform the behavior, you're much more likely to follow through. And there have been research studies that have shown this for habits like exercise, even quitting smoking, recycling, getting a flu shot or some kind of vaccination. Like there are all sorts of examples. And so it sounds simple to say, pick a time and a place when the behavior is going to occur. But that is often the first step for introducing a new behavior. Make sure you have space and a location for that behavior to live. So that's one way to do it.
All right. Thank you, James. Our next question comes from Taiwan.
For many people, it's difficult to break free from bad habits. And even though if we thought we have succeeded, it's still easy for us to slip back into the old ways. So can you please tell us how can we avoid relapse into the bad habits? Thanks a lot.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think this is something that's very common. Like we all have had habits that we did for a little bit and then we slid back. And reclaiming a habit is often just as important as starting it in the first place. So I think really the way to think about answering this question is not, hey, I have to be perfect. I can never make a mistake. I'd like to avoid slipping up. Of course, all of us would like to avoid it. And that's why many of the things that we talked about during the presentation, like priming the environment or joining a group where your desired behavior is the normal behavior, or making the habit really easy with the 2-minute rule, all of those strategies are intended to help you get started and stick with it. But even so, you're going to have times when you slip up. Like, nobody is perfect. And so I think that's where a strategy like never missing twice comes in. You know, what I realize the more that I study people who are top performers, who really achieve well in their particular domain, the more you start to notice these people aren't perfect either. They make mistakes just like everybody else, but they do tend to reclaim the habit very quickly. They tend to get back on track fast. And so I think a couple things you can do there. One, this philosophy of never miss twice. Two, have a plan for when you fail. So nobody is intending to fail, but if you do, what are you going to do to bounce back and make sure that you get back on track quickly? And having a plan for that rebound can be just as important as getting started in the first place.
That's so good, James. You know, my daughter's a great fan, and she uses the never miss twice. Works for her. I'm sure it will work for everybody. So here's a question out of Thailand.
หลายๆคนที่คิดอยากจะเปลี่ยนแปลงตัวเองแต่พวกเขาเหล่านั้นไม่ประสบความสำเร็จคุณเจมส์คิดว่าปัญหาส่วนใหญ่เกิดจากอะไรครับ
Yeah, good question. There are a lot of mistakes common mistakes and pitfalls people fall into. I would say the main one is probably starting too big. So the 2-minute rule can help there. Let's scale it down. Let's try to not be so ambitious. The other common pitfall that people slide into is picking a version of a habit that they think they should do because like society tells them to, or it's popular, or other people are talking about it. But you should pick the version that you are most excited about, that sounds fun to you. Exercise is a good example. Like, not everybody needs to work out like a bodybuilder just because, you know, that's what people on Instagram are doing, or that's what you see other people doing. You can pick many forms of exercise, you know, kayaking or rock climbing or running or hiking, whatever it is that's fun to you is what you should pick, because that's the behavior you're more likely to stick to. So choose the version of the habit that's most exciting to you.
Oh my goodness, James, well, we sure covered a lot in a very short amount of time. Thanks to all of you for all of your questions. And James, thank you so much for your answers and insights. We really appreciate you being here.
Oh, thank you so much. I appreciate the opportunity. I hope you all found it useful, and I'm wishing you the best.
Wow, so much information. No doubt I'm going to watch this session a few more times, and so can you. This content is available on demand for the next 30 days. So take advantage as you create small habits that can have a big impact on your life. Now it's time to grab some food and take a meal break with Kevin Guest and the Free Radicals.
This concludes your Usana Live.